Hey guys, it's Ben, back with my seventh reflection of the semester. This week's topic is going to be focused on image transfer. So this is when one sponsoring partner utilizes the positive image of another property and transfers that image back onto themselves. So let's get into it. So why spend millions of dollars in the first place on naming rights to a stadium or putting your brand logo on a jersey or the multi-million dollar sponsorships that are seen anywhere else in sports? So one of the main answers would be increased awareness, but that's not always the case because some brands, such as Coca-Cola, like we were talking about, they can't get any more awareness than they already have. If you're already at 100% awareness, so what else could you get? Well, the answer is image transfer. So this idea of image transfer has been around for a long time. Like even back in ancient Rome, we're talking about how the Roman games were used as a commercial tool to advance people's political agendas and that kind of stuff all throughout history. So essentially, advertising yourself with a sponsored brand that influences your brand's image with that image transfer. So looking here at how does that image transfer work. So on the left side here of this model, we have the event image. So this is what their image is like, typically with their characteristics, their other sponsors, the experience that their consumers have dealing with them, just basically how the public sees that brand. Then you have the image transfer going on in the middle of the model here with four external forces that are kind of having an influence on this image transfer. So identification, people's attitudes towards commercialization, the fit of the sponsorship, and the clutter among other sponsorships. Like, is it sponsorship soup, could you say? And then that transfers back onto the right here on the brand image. So an example we were talking about in class was banks doing this. So such as RBC with the Olympics. So the Olympics on the left here would have a great event in image. They have a lot of goodwill. They're wholesome games. Uh, Everyone loves the Olympics. No one has something bad to say really about the idea of the Olympics. Anyway, so RBC is a bank, and banks typically have poor image in the eyes of the public because little scummy sometimes, the government run, that kind of stuff. So this kind of partnership attaching themselves on to the Olympics like that could transfer some of the Olympics image back onto RBC and hopefully get consumers to think about them in the way that they think about the Olympics. And we're also talking about how fossil fuels companies are trying to do this, but I feel like that'd be a lot more difficult to achieve. So the first example I have here is Mint. It's perfect. So it's between Kawhi Leonard as the event property, I guess you could say, or the sponsored property, and New Balance. So Kawhi used to be a Jordan athlete. He was Jordan brand, everything. Um, and back then, I thought New Balance as like kind of like a dad shoe brand. Like I thought it wasn't cool at all. Um, nothing good about it. Like their shoes were ugly, their clothing had nothing to it. It was just kind of something that I never got into. But Kawhi left Jordan Brand and ended up signing with New Balance, and I was kind of taken aback at first. I thought that was a pretty weird thing to do, but he goes on to win a championship and comes out with these clothing lines of all his slogans, new shoes, uh, just new clothing in general, and I thought it was awesome. It took advantage of Kawhi's image as the board man, I guess you could say, or the fun guy, um, and his how the public perceives Kawhi, and New Balance took advantage of that and transferred some of that onto them. So the image transfer in this case was so successful because the brand was enhanced when us consumers saw that this image-based similarity was between the two brands. So we gained abstract perceptions about this, and then that's what led me to altering my perception about New Balance. So then the other day I was at the Niagara Outlet Mall and I walked by the New Balance store and I took a look inside. The first thing I saw was the Boardman Gets Paid t-shirt, and I just had to buy it. Like that's the extent to which Kawhi has altered how I perceived the New Balance brand. So moving on, I just kind of want to touch on this a little bit about Bianca Andreescu, um, because people are definitely utilizing her image as a new champion. So before she had ever won any major tennis tournaments, she had only, I forget if we are talking about this in sponsorship or a different sport management class I had, but I know she only had a sponsorship with like a wine company, like a Canadian-based wine company. But then she goes on, wins the U.S. Open, or I think it's called the U.S. Open, and all of a sudden I'm on Instagram and I see Bianca get a Rolex sponsorship, Bianca get a BMW sponsorship, and now that she is a champion, all these luxury brands want to utilize her image as a champion and then tie that in with their image. And I mean the extent of image transfer in this case isn't as enormous as Kawhi and New Balance, but you could see how luxury companies want to take advantage of these kind of properties of champions and bring that into their fold of partners as well, which is pretty interesting. So here, this artifact is, I think it's pretty cool. It's a collaboration between the Jordan brand and a elite luxury clothing brand called Dior. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. So how this is working here is they're teaming up. It happens all the time in sports or in shoes, I mean. Where a celebrity or a company wants to team up with a shoe brand or a certain athlete with their shoe and create some kind of custom colorways. So we saw Kyrie do this in the summer with his SpongeBob line of shoes. Last year he had a cereal box line of shoes. And it's just kind of interesting way to play on things. But in these type of cases, um, Jordan wants to advance their luxury items in their collections. So this is going to be a very limited shoe. This is going to go for thousands of dollars every pair. Um, and it's just a way that Jordan could utilize the Dior brand and Dior could get awareness out of this deal, but Jordan could transfer some of that luxury image onto themselves by making an exclusive item like this, a limited edition item, that the price point could be absurdly high on because of that transfer of luxury image that they're getting from Dior. So in this case, the image transfer is so successful and it's enhanced because it's actually a functional use of the similarity between the two brands. So they're incorporating them into one singular brand on a shoe, which is pretty cool in my opinion. So here I got two commercials um, that I'm gonna play back to back. They're not too long, so stick with me on this one. The first one is a Progressive commercial with Baker Mayfield, and I think that this commercial does a great job of transferring image and that congruence, that fit. Um, and then the second commercial is a State Farm commercial with Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes, and unfortunately, this one isn't as successful in the image transfer as the first one. And so I'm going to play both of them, and then I'm going to dissect them afterwards, compare and contrast them. So that's the Progressive one with Baker Mayfield. Now we're moving into the State Farm one with Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. So once again, this is a little bit of a back-to-back video, and I was unable to get them to work in the video on YouTube in this kind of format. So I'm going to have to ask you to go back into that referenced YouTube playlist on my channel and play both of the Baker Mayfield Progressive commercials and the Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes State Farm commercial. So comparing those two videos, they're both a series of commercials, both utilizing a football player or multiple football players, big name football players to connect their brand to and associate themselves with. And they're both similar properties. They're both insurance companies. So these are two very similar advertising campaigns, but they're both have different outcomes in the terms of image transferring. So let's start with the Baker Mayfield one. So the one we watched was him cutting his lawn, but all the ones in the series have funny little different at home chore things that he's kind of doing. So one, he's saying goodbye to all the fans after a game, and then he starts cleaning up the stands. And there's another one where he's down in the tunnels, and there's like a beeping and like a fire alarm, and he's trying to figure out which one it is. And there's one with the breaker and all that kind of stuff. There's a ton of them, and they're all spot on. They're all hilarious because they're all like the congruence of this one is just so perfect that it really helps transfer the image of Baker Mayfield over to Progressive. So they do the whole at home with Baker Mayfield, which matches the slogan of Progressive, which is it's your home, you should take care of it, or something along those lines. So that's one of the external factors that affects image transfer is the actual fit of the partnership. Like that's done excellently. And they make it feel more wholesome. And I'm not a Browns fan myself, but if I was, like, I'd love these commercials even more because it's at home in Cleveland. Baker's home is the stadium. Um, and it's just great. It does a great job of transferring all of Baker's perceptions that I have of him as like a wholesome family guy or whatever, and transferring that over onto Progressive. So I think that's a great advertising campaign. Now, alternatively, the second one we watched was the State Farm series that's been going on, and I think these commercials are horrible. And they do a terrible job of transferring the image of an idol that I love, such as Patrick Mahomes, onto another property. So you could chalk it up to bad writing, but it just doesn't do a good job of the things that the Progressive commercial did. So State Farm has a whole State Farm arena and a State Farm team, but there's no fan loyalty or there's no fan association to that. So there's no invested interest that you could transfer over onto the sponsoring property. Whereas in the Baker Mayfield one, he was at home in Cleveland, acting like the arena was his home. That brings in the fans, the loyalty, the brand association, and then that's what can be transferred onto the other property, onto Progressive. So these are two very similar advertising campaigns with two very different outcomes in terms of that image transfer. So that's all the artifacts that I have for you this week. I'll see you next week.